Hello, my friends. It's Kim, and welcome to Life Prepared. I am going to make a recipe from this book, which was gathered from various areas in the UK and compiled into one book. And these are wartime recipes that they would use to figure out how to feed your family healthy, delicious meals and make things really stretch. The one I'm going to be doing today, it's on page 14. Where am I here? It is called Canadian Hot Pot. Okay? What made me think of this is I picked up a roast, and right now beef prices, this is actually a good price for beef. It was only $4 a pound. The prices of beef have gone really sky high, as well as other meats. And normally in the past, I would, this is almost a $7 piece of meat. Prices have gotten high, and I can't afford it. About that, dog had to go out. So I have decided I'm going to turn this into 3 meals. So each one would be approximately $2.25 worth of meat. So I went to my little old cookbooks, and I found that recipe, and I'll show you the rest of the ingredients. But I'm going to do a modern twist on this, and I'll show you how. The other ingredients called for is a head of cabbage. Well, I have a really sad little piece of cabbage here that needs to get used up. It calls for a half a pound of onions, which this one happens to be 7 ounces, 7 7/8 ounces, so just a hair shy of a half a pound. It calls for 2 tablespoons of rice. I'm going to use a little extra to make up for some of the other foods that I'm missing here. And it calls for a half a pound of fresh tomatoes. Now, in the fall of the year, this probably would be a dish made frequently. And you would have cabbages and tomatoes and onions together. This is March in Michigan. There are no fresh tomatoes unless what you call in the store is fresh. They taste like cardboard. So I'm going to use some canned tomatoes. And during that time, you would have used what you had available. It also calls for fresh herbs, which again, in the fall of the year, there would be plenty. I don't have any, so I'm going to use dehydrated herbs. I have some of my celery. There's some chives. I thought Italian seasoning would add something different. I have a little bit of thyme. And then, of course, salt and pepper. So that is going to be the bulk of the recipe today. So let me get started chopping a few things up. With everything during that time, absolutely nothing was wasted. So I'm going to actually take this cabbage core and some of the pieces that were a little tough, and I'm just going to cut them into really small pieces. Now, if you have a food processor or whatever, like I said, you can modernize this, make it a little less work for yourself. Go ahead and pulse those up. But I didn't feel like, all I have is my little Ninja blender, and I didn't feel like getting it out and having to wash it. So even these little pieces, every little piece of this core, as much as possible, is going to be used up in this recipe. Right, I have everything prepped here. I have just over a half a pound of meat. I am saving those scraps to go into my soup bin. I have the rice. I didn't say how to do the onions, so I quartered and sliced them. I chopped the cabbage up, and I decided to drain the tomatoes. You will need some water at the end, and I will save that juice for that. So how am I going to modernize this? I'm going to use my Instant Pot Max. The recipe says to layer these into a pan and to cook in a slow oven. Now, a slow oven, according to the directions, is 275 degrees. So I figured a crock pot would be perfect. So the first thing I'm going to do, because I like to do it this way, is I'm going to take some onions. if anything sticks to the bottom, I'd rather have that. And they get a little bit caramelized and just really good. Now, I generously salted and peppered my meat here. That's going to be my next layer. Just going to sprinkle. And I cut it into rather small cubes. I figured this is something that the housewife back then would do because you want to get meat in every bite, but you don't have a lot to go around. So, all right, now I'm going to sprinkle in some cabbage. And I'm going to save the cabbage for the top at the end here. It says to cover it with your cabbage leaves. Those would be used extensively. But, you know, that would be cooking in the stove. And oops, oh darn, just spilled my rice a bit. Oh well, let's scoop up what we got here. Put half my rice in here. I did add a little bit extra rice because of the little bit less meat that I have. And I'm going to top it with some of my tomatoes, about half. These would normally be sliced. Remember, if you did this in the fall, this would be perfect because that cabbage, tomatoes, and onions and fresh herbs would all be available. But back then, the housewife did what she had to do. And then I'm going to sprinkle on my herbs, which they said to tie your fresh herbs together. This is a little bit of celery that I dehydrated, which of course they would have done back then as well, because there's no way you would get that fresh. You couldn't go to the grocery store and buy whatever you wanted. That's some chives. I'm going to sprinkle in just a little bit of thyme. And I decided, since there's tomato in here, to add, and I don't have any fresh herbs, which is normally what I would have, would be what's in Italian herbs. So I'll sprinkle some of those in as well. The next step is just to layer it again. And I think this would be a really nice recipe. I think I am going to, you could make another side of rice. Rice wasn't used a lot in the UK during the war, and this recipe's come from the UK. But I think it would be really nice to serve with rice. In my case, I'll probably make some mashed potatoes because that's what the guys here prefer. And I'm going to finish with my tomatoes on top. And that would be about the tomatoes that you got. I think that's probably a half a pound of tomatoes. They're probably more generous than what they would normally have. Okay, and then I'm going to add a few more of my herbs because I want lots of flavor. Just sprinkle in the rest of that celery. A little bit more of my dehydrated chives. It's going to be kind of oniony. They used a lot of onion then. They would even give onions away as grand prizes because they were considered so important then. And then I'm going to top it with the rest of my cabbage. Now this would normally be a lot more because, like I said, you would use a whole head of cabbage, and this would go really, really far, make a huge meal. The recipe, because you would be cooking it in an oven, says to cover this with the cabbage leaves because they didn't have aluminum foil and all that kind of stuff. And then to add water to 2 inches above it because that would be in an oven. I'm using the Instant Pot. Instead of water, I'm going to use, I'm not going to waste it, my tomato juice. And because I have it, I made some fresh chicken bone broth yesterday. You can see how gelatinous it gets. I'm going to use that in place of a lot of my water. And then the rest I can once this is done. If you have a wood stove, I used to cook over my wood stove all the time. This is a great recipe. Get yourself a nice heavy bottomed pan and add all of your ingredients. What I used to do is take some of the canning rings and like 3 of them, put my pot on top like a trivet and cook my meal for most of the day. So that should give me enough. I'll check it once it melts and see if I need to add any more stock or not. But now it's just a matter of time. I'm going to put it on slow cook for 3 hours. I'm going to use the high function because that would be closer to the 275 degrees. and then we'll take a peek at it and see how it turned out. Right here is our finish. Let's see, is it gonna... Here's the finished meal. And I tasted it, and I don't think, for our taste anyway, we would like it over mashed potatoes. Now, in the UK, mashed potatoes were served pretty much for every meal. They were told to feed your family 1 pound of potatoes per person per day for proper nutrition, and because they had them available there. For me, I think I'm going to do some kind of rice with this. That was available during World War II in the US. It was in Britain as well, but they didn't use it as much. Since it already has some rice in it, I think I would prefer to eat this over rice. So the next step, I think I'm just going to strain this out of my Instant Pot and make a quick batch of rice in the same pot. I won't have anything else to clean. All right, here is our completed meal. What I did was I kind of took, there was a little bit of liquid. I don't know if it was the Instant Pot, but I strained the vegetables and the meat out, and I used the liquid to cook the rice. I only had to add about a half a cup of water, so that turned out really nice. And I'll do a quick taste test for you here. It's a little hot, so bear with me. I think it tastes pretty good. Like I said, I don't think I would enjoy it over mashed potatoes, which was how the British probably would eat it. And yeah, no, not over mashed potatoes, especially since I used Italian seasonings in it. Not sure, but it's worth making. It was worth eating. It made a huge pot. It'll give us more than 3 servings, that's for sure. And it's got a lot of nutrition in it. So I would call this a success as far as this particular recipe goes. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave me a comment below. Give me a thumbs up and a subscribe if you feel like it. And I hope you have a fantastic day.